The paperwork said he was 14 kilograms of non-hazardous biological material, Earth origin, companion classification, no export restrictions. The paperwork was technically correct. Biscuit was 14 kilograms. He was from Earth. He was, in the loosest possible interpretation of the word, a companion. The paperwork did not mention that he was a Maine Coon, which is to say, it did not mention that he was the feline equivalent of a man who has been lifting railway ties since he was 3 years old and has never once considered that this was unusual. It did not mention that he was 6 years old, which in cat terms is the precise age at which an animal has stopped being interested in impressing anyone and has committed fully to the project of existing at maximum comfort regardless of what the universe has to say about it. It did not mention that his default expression was the one that large predators wear when they are deciding whether or not a thing is worth the energy, and that the answer is almost always no, but the deciding takes a while, and during the deciding they do not look away. None of this was my fault. I filled out the forms they gave me. I wrote what the forms asked. My name is Nora Casson. I am a logistics coordinator for a mid-tier freight management firm based out of the Outer Ring Transit Hub at Keshavar Station, and I have been moving things across interstellar transit corridors for 11 years. Biological cargo, inert cargo, diplomatic cargo, cargo that somebody's government has decided is too politically sensitive to put on a civilian freighter, and therefore insists on diplomatic courier status, which in practice means I ride in a nicer cabin, and the paperwork is in triplicate. I have transported seed banks, decommissioned medical equipment, cultural artifacts packed in humidity-controlled foam, and on one occasion, a very old man who had decided to spend his final years on his colony world and did not trust the standard passenger routes. I have transported all of these things without incident. I am good at my job. Biscuit had never been transported before. He had, to my knowledge, never been anywhere he didn't choose to be. He lived in my quarters at Keshavar Station, in a cat bed that he used approximately 40% of the time, the other 60% of which he spent distributed across my furniture in positions that suggested he had made a detailed study of every flat surface and had ranked them by warmth and strategic elevation. He was not, in theory, supposed to come with me on this particular run. The assignment had been entirely routine. Courier a diplomatic exchange package from Keshavar to the Conclave receiving bay at Veth-Kaari Prime, 6 hours transit via the high-speed corridor, hand off the package to a receiving official, come back. No complications. The complication was that I had come home the night before departure to find that my neighbor, who was supposed to feed Biscuit during the 3-day turnaround, had received emergency family transfer orders and was already gone. I had stood in my doorway for approximately 10 seconds, looking at Biscuit sitting in the middle of the floor looking back at me with the expression that meant he knew something had changed and was reserving judgment. Then I had looked at the carrier in the closet. Then I had looked at the paperwork I still needed to file before morning. I added one line to the manifest. Non-hazardous biological sample, Earth origin, companion classification, 14 kilograms. I filed the forms. I went to bed. What I did not know at the time was that the diplomatic exchange package I was couriering also contained, somewhere in its nested layers of bureaucratic description, a notation that the package was of high cultural sensitivity and would be received by an honor escort from the Veth-Kaari Conclave's 7th tier, which is the Veth-Kaari equivalent of a state military escort. I did not know this because nobody had told me, and the briefing document had used a Veth-Kaari administrative term that my translation overlay rendered as official reception committee, which I had understood to mean 2 people with a cart and a signature pad. The 7th tier does not use carts. I discovered this when I walked off the boarding ramp at Veth-Kaari Prime Transit Dock, with the diplomatic package on a hand trolley and Biscuit in his carrier hooked over my other arm, and found 12 Veth-Kaari honor guards in full ceremonial armor standing in a double column at the base of the ramp, waiting. I should describe the Veth-Kaari, because the story does not make sense without that context. The Veth-Kaari are roughly 2.5 meters tall, which means that even the shortest of them looked at the top of my head the way I look at a kitchen counter. They are bilaterally symmetrical in the broad sense, meaning 2 arms, 2 legs, upright posture, but the details diverge considerably from there. Their skin is a dense scaled plating that ranges from dark gray to near black, iridescent at the edges in low light. They have 4 eyes in a horizontal band across the upper face, the outer 2 set at angles that give them peripheral vision approaching 360 degrees, and the inner 2 fixed forward in a binocular arrangement. Their hands have 6 fingers each, the 2 outer ones opposable, and at the end of every finger is a retractable hook that, I had been told in my pre-mission cultural briefing, they do not deploy in polite company. They are, in the long and well-documented history of interstellar contact, one of about 4 species that has never, in recorded interaction with humanity, been observed to show physical alarm in the presence of a human. They are the species that our own xenobiology teams have most consistently flagged as peers at the apex end of the threat assessment scale. They have a word in their language, roughly transliterated as Veth-Kaari, which means something like the moment before a predator decides. Their honorifics incorporate it as the highest form of professional compliment. When a Veth-Kaari says you have Veth-Kaari, they are telling you that they recognize you as the kind of thing that other things get out of the way of. None of the 12 honor guards at the base of the ramp had that word available for a human carrying a carrier bag over one arm. What they had was the posture of people who have spent their professional lives being the most dangerous things in every room they walk into, and who have arrived at a kind of settled, proprietary calm about that fact. They stood in precise formation, armor gleaming, and they looked at me the way a mountain looks at weather, acknowledgement without particular interest. The lead guard, I could tell by the additional tier markings on the shoulder plating, stepped forward and inclined his head by approximately 4 degrees, which my briefing notes had told me was the correct greeting for a civilian contractor delivering diplomatic cargo. "Coordinator Casson," he said, in accented but competent standard. "I am Escort Commander Drevath of the 7th Tier. We will convey the package to the receiving bay. Please surrender the manifest to my second." His second stepped forward and held out a hand. I handed over the manifest with one hand. With the other, I set Biscuit's carrier down on the dock surface, because it was heavier than it looked and my arm was tired. Drevath's gaze dropped to the carrier. It was a standard mesh-sided soft carrier, gray, with a padded base and a zipper top. Through the mesh, Biscuit was visible. He had spent the first hour of the flight wedged against the back of the carrier with one paw over his nose, and had then apparently decided that the motion was acceptable and had relocated to the front, where he was sitting upright with his tail wrapped around his feet, watching the transit dock through the mesh with the focused attention of a creature cataloging new information for future reference. At that moment, his gaze moved from the dock to Drevath. He did not move. He did not make a sound. He looked at Drevath the way he looked at things he had not yet assessed, which was with his whole face turned toward them, all the light of his amber eyes settled on the object in question, and no indication whatsoever of what conclusion he was arriving at. The 12 Veth-Kaari honor guards stood in their precise column. Drevath's second, who had just taken my manifest, stopped moving. "What," said Drevath, "is that?" "That's Biscuit," I said. "He's my cat, it's all on the manifest." There was a pause. "Your manifest listed a non-hazardous biological sample." "He is non-hazardous," I said. "He's a cat. I've had him for 6 years. He's never hurt anything except one houseplant, and that was a territorial dispute that he won fair and square." Drevath looked at Biscuit for a moment longer. Biscuit looked back at him. Biscuit did not look away. He had no particular reason to look away. In his experience, most things that he looked at eventually did something interesting or they didn't, and in neither case was there any reason for him to stop looking. "What classification," Dreveth said carefully, "is this animal on your homeworld?" "Domestic," I said, "pet, companion animal. They're descended from desert predators, but that was a long time ago. They hunt mice, occasionally birds. He mostly hunts my socks." Dreveth's second had not moved. I noticed with mild interest that several of the guards in the second column had shifted their weight, not backward precisely, laterally, the way that large things shift when they are recalibrating something. "How large," Dreveth said, still watching Biscuit, "does this animal become?" "That's about it," I said. "He's full grown, 14 kilograms. Maine Coons are the large end, but they're still just cats." "And it is," Dreveth said, "alone with you, in transit." "Yes." "And you travel with it routinely?" "Not this trip usually. My neighbor fell through. I picked up Biscuit's carrier again. He'll be fine in the carrier during the official handoff. He's used to waiting." Biscuit, demonstrating that he was used to waiting, yawned. It was a comprehensive yawn that involved his entire jaw architecture, which in Maine Coons is substantial, and it displayed a quantity of tooth that I had always found reassuring in the way that a well-maintained piece of machinery is reassuring. Biscuit had been eating well his whole life. His dentition reflected this. The sound from one of the guards in the back column was small enough that I almost missed it. Not quite a word. More the involuntary consonant a person makes when they have recalculated something and found that the new number is uncomfortable. Dreveth was still watching Biscuit with all four of his forward-facing eyes. His outer peripheral eyes, I noticed for the first time, were also tracking toward the carrier. All four of them at once was something I did not have a cultural note for. "Coordinator Casson," he said. "The transit to the receiving bay is 2 kilometers through the interior corridor. For protocol reasons, I am required to inform you that 7th-tier escorts do not, as a matter of procedure, share transport with unregistered apex fauna." I looked at him. "He's on the manifest." "He is registered as non-hazardous biological sample." "Which he is." "On Veth-Kaari Prime," Dreveth said slowly, as though he was constructing something and checking each piece before adding the next. "The classification non-hazardous requires that an animal have no predatory reflex, no territorial behavior, and a maximum jaw force below the threshold for structural damage to standard plating." I considered this. "I mean," I said, "he definitely has territorial behavior, and I don't know what his jaw force is. I've never tested it. He's never bitten anything that I know of. Is there a form I should have filled out?" There was a pause that was longer than the previous pauses. "No," said Dreveth, "there is not currently a form." "Great," I said, "so we're fine." We were not, as it turned out, exactly fine, but we were moving, which is the important thing. The interior transit corridor at Veth-Kaari Prime's main diplomatic dock was wide enough for 4 of the honor guards to walk abreast, with high vaulted ceilings in gray-green stone that had been dressed with geometric inlay, in a pattern that my cultural notes told me represented the names of notable Veth-Kaari military victories, which is to say most of the wall was covered. The light was cool and even, sourced from panels set into the inlay at regular intervals, and the floor was polished to a near-mirror finish. It was, aesthetically, the kind of corridor that had been built to make things feel small. I felt this less than I usually do in imposing places because I was carrying a cat, and it is very difficult to feel ceremonially diminished while holding a cat carrier, because cats are fundamentally incompatible with ceremony, and some of that leaks through. The formation was 4 guards in front, then me with the diplomatic trolley and Biscuit's carrier, then Dreveth immediately behind me and to my left, then the remaining 7 guards behind him. This was the standard escort formation, according to my briefing notes. Dreveth being directly behind me was a mark of seniority, not concern. We had been walking for approximately 3 minutes when Biscuit decided that the carrier was no longer interesting. I felt it before I heard it, a shift in weight against the front mesh, and then the particular sound that a carrier zipper makes when it is being worked from the inside by a cat who has learned, through application and experimentation, that zippers yield to persistent pawing if the angle is right. I had reinforced all the zippers. I thought I had reinforced all the zippers. Oh, for I started. The zipper gave. The top flap folded back. Biscuit stepped out onto the dock surface with the considered pace of a cat who has made a decision and is now executing it in his own time. He was, outside the carrier, considerably more present than he was inside it. Maine Coons have a quality that is difficult to describe to people who have not lived with one. They take up a room in a way that their physical size alone doesn't account for. Biscuit was 14 kilograms of dense, long-furred, heavy-boned cat, and he moved the way he always moved, which was with the unhurried, weight-forward ease of a creature that has never had cause to wonder whether it belongs in a given space. He looked at the corridor. He looked at the guards in front. He looked at the inlay on the walls, the kind of methodical scan he applied to new spaces, working systematically from near to far. Then he sat down, tucked his tail around his feet, and looked at Dreveth. Dreveth had stopped walking. The 4 guards in front had also stopped walking. They had stopped because Dreveth had stopped, and they had been trained to match the escort commander's pace. But there was a secondary quality to their stillness that suggested the training and the instinct were, in this moment, in agreement. "He does this," I said. "He's fine, he likes to stretch. I'll get him back in a minute." I reached down to collect Biscuit. He stepped forward out of range, not quickly, not with alarm, just with the small and definitive repositioning of a cat that has registered a hand, and decided that the hand's plan is not his plan. He walked forward, past me, in the direction of the guards. The 2 front left guards took a step back. I want to be precise about this, because I have thought about it in the 11 months since it happened, and I still find it remarkable. These were 7th-tier honor guards. They had, collectively, more military decorations than I have pieces of furniture. The tallest of them stood a full meter above Biscuit's head. They stepped back. They did not step far back, approximately 20 centimeters each, and they did it smoothly, without breaking their alignment relative to each other, which told me it was not a rout but a recalibration, the kind of adjustment that a trained combatant makes when they have updated their read of a threat and are repositioning accordingly. Biscuit walked between them and continued down the corridor. "Coordinator Casson," Dreveth said from behind me. His voice was entirely level. "Your animal is." "I see him," I said. "Biscuit here." Biscuit paused. He looked back at me. The look was not defiant and it was not obedient. It was assessing. He was deciding whether here, as a concept, had merit. He walked back to me and sat at my feet. He did not get into the carrier. I looked at Dreveth. "I can carry him," I said. There was a brief silence. "That would be," Dreveth said, "acceptable." I picked up Biscuit. He settled against my chest with the boneless, redistributing weight shift of a cat who is comfortable being held, which with a 14-kilogram Maine Coon means that you feel, suddenly, as though you are holding a sandbag that has decided to cooperate. One of his front paws rested on my forearm. He looked forward over my shoulder at the corridor ahead. We walked. For several minutes it was quiet. The guards held formation. The corridor passed in measured sections of inlaid stone. I watched the diplomatic trolley's wheels on the mirrored floor and made a mental note to reconfigure the carrier latches when we got back. Then Biscuit's head turned slowly to the left. There was a side corridor, a maintenance access from the look of it, dark beyond the archway. I had not noticed it. I had not noticed it because there was nothing in it that was relevant to my purpose. Biscuit had noticed it because he notices everything, which is not a skill I taught him. It is a thing he arrived with, part of the same package as the perpetual assessment, and the eyes that gather light like a camera lens. He was looking at the archway with the particular quality of attention that meant he had heard or smelled something I hadn't. His ears, which are tufted at the tips in the Maine Coon fashion and are therefore more visually expressive than a standard cat's, were oriented forward, not flat, not tucked, forward and very slightly tilted. I felt the 4 leading guards reorient before I understood why. Then I understood why. 2 figures had appeared in the far end of the maintenance corridor, moving in our direction. Dock workers, from the look of them, in Veth-Kaari Transit Authority coveralls, carrying equipment cases. They had not done anything wrong, and they were not doing anything wrong. They had come around a corner in a side corridor and were now, unfortunately for them, visible to 12 honor guards in escort formation during a high-sensitivity diplomatic transit. The guards in front stopped. The guards behind closed up. Dreveth said something short in Veth-Kaari that I didn't catch, and the 2 workers froze at the far end of the maintenance corridor with the immediate total stillness of people who have been given a command by someone in 7th-tier armor and have correctly identified this as a situation requiring compliance. Biscuit looked at them. He looked at them for a long moment. His ears were forward. His tail, which had been hanging loosely over my arm, moved once, not a swish, not an irritated lash, but the slow, deliberate single sweep of a cat doing final calculations. Then his ears relaxed. He looked away. That was all. I noticed that Dreveth second, who had been walking 2 paces back and to my right, exhaled slowly. I did not mention this. We continued down the corridor. The receiving bay was another 1.5 kilometers, which gave Biscuit enough time to express 3 additional opinions about the environment. The first was that the inlay pattern on the upper right section of the wall between junctions 4 and 5 was worth stopping to examine at close range, which required me to also stop, and the guards to also stop, while he looked at the wall for approximately 40 seconds with the focused methodology he applied to unusual surfaces. Nobody said anything while this was happening. I found out later, in a debrief I was not expecting to be invited to, that Dreveth had interpreted this pause as a scan. The second opinion was about a ventilation grill set into the floor near the mid-corridor pressure door. Biscuit's assessment of the grill was that it smelled interesting, which he communicated by pressing his entire face against it and breathing slowly through his nose for what I timed at 22 seconds. This time, 2 of the guards in the forward column had also turned toward the grill. Not dramatically, just turned. I asked about this in the debrief too, and was told that on Veth-Kaari Prime, an apex predator attending carefully to a ventilation source is a recognized precursor behavior with specific tactical implications. I did not tell them that, in my experience, an apex predator attending carefully to a ventilation source on Earth means that there might be a bug in the duct. What I did notice, while Biscuit was attending to the grill, was that the 2 guards who had turned toward it were doing something subtle and specific with their posture. They were not preparing for anything. They were not reaching for anything. They were simply oriented in the way that well-trained bodies orient when a credible source of information is pointing at a thing, and you have been alive long enough to know that this is worth noting. They looked at the grill, looked at Biscuit, looked at each other. One of them said something short and low in Veth-Kaari that my translator did not catch. Biscuit withdrew his face from the grill, sat up, and sneezed twice. Then he looked at me with the expression that meant the investigation was complete and the results were inconclusive. Nothing there, I told the guards. The guard who had spoken looked at me. How do you know? He lost interest, I said. If there were something there, he would still be looking. The guard looked at the grill. He looked at Biscuit. He appeared to arrive at the same conclusion through a different route, because he straightened, said something else short to his companion, and they both turned forward. I noted but did not comment on the fact that for the next 100 meters of corridor, The guard spacing in the forward column was marginally wider than it had been before. Not by much. Maybe 30 centimeters per pair. Just enough room in each gap for a large cat to walk through if he needed to. The third opinion was about Dreveth himself. We were 400 meters from the receiving bay when Biscuit, who had been riding against my chest with the tranquil weight distribution of a cat who has found a position he likes, turned his head and looked directly at Dreveth. Dreveth was 2 paces behind me and to the left. He had been maintaining exactly that spacing for the entire transit, moving with the kind of regulated precision that comes from enough practice that the body does it without instruction. He had been watching the corridor ahead, the side passages, and, periodically, Biscuit, with the composed vigilance of a professional doing a job he does well. When Biscuit turned and looked at him, Dreveth met the look. I do not know what passed between them, because I cannot read a Maine Coon's face in any detail that would satisfy a scientist, and I have even less insight into the Veth-Kaari emotional register. What I can tell you is that Biscuit looked at Dreveth for 6 or 7 seconds, and Dreveth looked back at him for 6 or 7 seconds, and then Biscuit turned his head forward again and Dreveth said, in a voice that was precisely the same volume and cadence as every previous thing he had said, "Coordinator Casson, what does this animal eat?" "Wet food mostly," I said. "High protein. He also likes a specific brand of freeze-dried chicken that I have to order specially because they don't stock it at Kesavar Station." "What prey does it consume in your homeworld's natural environment?" "Whatever he can catch," I said. "He's indoor-outdoor when we're on station and I have a suitable facility. He brings me things occasionally. Mice mostly, a lizard once, a bird twice, though I tried to discourage the birds." "Once," Dreveth said carefully. "I wasn't always fast enough," I said. There was a pause. "At what range," Dreveth said, "does this animal begin its approach?" I thought about it. "I've seen him catch things from about 4 meters with one movement," I said. "Longer with a stalk. He's patient. He'll wait." Another pause. "How long?" "I watched him wait 40 minutes once for a mouse that had gone behind the storage unit," I said. "Completely still, didn't move. The mouse eventually came back out." Dreveth said nothing for a moment. Then, "What happened to the mouse?" "The question resolved itself," I said. Dreveth was quiet for a stretch of corridor. The formation moved in the measured, practiced rhythm of an escort that does this enough that it requires no active thought, and I had time to become aware of the fact that the silence from behind me was a different quality of silence than the silence before the questions. Less routine, more like the silence in a room where someone is doing arithmetic. "Coordinator Casson," Dreveth said eventually. "Yes." "The environmental assessment behaviors, the wall scan, the ventilation check, these are standard for him." "Yes," I said. "He does it in new spaces. He likes to know what's around him." "On Veth-Kaari," Dreveth said, "the scan pattern you described, structured, systematic, near to far, is documented in our tactical literature as something that certain predator-class organisms perform in advance of committing to a course of action. We have a term for it. Roughly translated, learning the room before you own it." I looked at the back of the guards in front of me. "He does this at home too," I said. "He scans my apartment every morning. He's done it for 6 years." "And has he found anything?" Dreveth said. "In 6 years of scanning?" "No," I said. "Which means," Dreveth said, with the precision of someone arriving at a point they've been building toward, "that for 6 years every morning he has confirmed that the space is clear and all variables remain within acceptable parameters." "That's one way to put it," I said. "It is on Veth-Kaari exactly how we describe the morning protocols of a 7th-tier station officer," Dreveth said. "Scan, confirm, log, every morning, every space." I did not say anything for a moment. "He also pushes things off counters occasionally," I said. Just to see what happens. Drevath was quiet for a moment. Our junior officers do something similar, he said. We call it stress testing structural assumptions. I focused on the diplomatic trolley wheels for the rest of the corridor. The receiving bay was a large, high-ceilinged chamber at the end of the diplomatic corridor, fitted with the kind of formal stone and inlay decor that the Veth-Kaari apply to anything they consider worth impressing. There were 2 additional officials already there. The receiving coordinator for the Conclave's diplomatic intake, who was handling the formal transfer paperwork, and a cultural attaché who was there, I gathered, to observe the handoff of whatever was in the diplomatic package and ensure that the transfer met Conclave protocol. The cultural attaché's name, as best as my translator could render it, was something like Kasavrin. She was not in armor. She was in the civilian administrative equivalent of formal attire, which for Veth-Kaari meant layered panels in dark colors and a considerable amount of precise metalwork. She had the look of someone who spent most of her professional life in a room managing things that other people's negligence had made complicated, which is a look I recognize because I spend most of my professional life in the same room. She looked at me. She looked at the diplomatic trolley. She looked at Biscuit, who I was still holding. "Is that," she said, "accompanying the package?" "No," I said. "He's mine. He's listed on my personal manifest." She looked at Biscuit for a moment. Biscuit looked at her. She was, unlike Drevath and the guards, not in armor, and she was closer to the standard Veth-Kaari height range rather than the upper end that seemed to be a professional criterion for 7th-tier service. This meant she was only 2 meters and perhaps a little, rather than 2.5, and she was meeting Biscuit at a range that I recognized from watching him with other people. He registered as the accessible zone, the range at which he commits to an opinion. He looked at her. Then he extended his nose in her direction. This is a thing cats do when they are considering whether they want to know more about a specific thing. It is, in the context of greeting another cat or a familiar person, an invitation. In the context of a Veth-Kaari cultural attaché who had never encountered a Maine Coon before, it apparently read as something else, because Kasavrin took a half-step back with a smoothness that told me the movement was instinctive rather than decided. "He's friendly," I said. "He's just smelling you." "He is," Kasavrin said carefully, initiating a contact approach. "He's saying hello," I said, with his sensory organs extended in a forward threat orientation. "His nose," I said, "extended, yes." There was a short silence. "The 7th tier," Kasavrin said, looking at Drevath, "escorted this animal through the full interior corridor." "The animal is the property of the diplomatic courier," Drevath said. "It was listed on the manifest as non-hazardous biological sample, Earth origin, companion classification." Kasavrin looked at Biscuit again. Biscuit had retracted his nose and was now doing the thing he did when he had decided a person was not going to be interesting in the near term, which was to look at a mid-distance point slightly above and to the right of the person in question, as though something of greater significance was happening there. Kasavrin watched him do this. "Drevath," she said, "this animal looked away from you." "Yes," said Drevath. "During the transit. At multiple points." A silence. "It assessed you and determined you were not a priority." "On 3 separate occasions," Drevath said. "The 4th time it held the assessment longer." I had, at this point, lost the thread of what they were communicating to each other. I understood the words. The subtext was in a register I did not have a map for. I held Biscuit, who had found a position against my chest that he liked and was settling into with the progressive weight increase of a cat approaching comfort. "The manifest," I said, "all checks out. I'd like to complete the handoff and get back to the transit dock. We have a 6-hour return corridor and I need to get him fed before then or he starts complaining." Kasavrin looked at me. Your animal makes vocalizations when not fed. Yes, he has opinions about meal timing. What register? Low and repetitive mostly, sometimes loud. He has a lot to say about it. She looked at Biscuit again. Biscuit, who had been settling into comfort, chose this moment to look at her again, not a renewed assessment, just the casual sweep of the room that cats do periodically, checking that nothing has changed in the environment since the last check. His gaze passed over her for a second and continued to the walls. Casavrin straightened. "Coordinator Casson," she said, "I need to file an amended receipt for the diplomatic package." "Absolutely," I said. "Do you need me to sign anything additional?" "I also need to file an environmental contact report regarding the presence of your companion animal on Veth-Kaari prime territory." "Of course," I said, "I can wait." "And," she said, "I need to update the transit classification for the companion animal for the return journey." I paused. The classification was filed before departure. "The classification," Casavrin said, choosing her words with the care of someone building something load-bearing, "does not, at present, have an adequate category for what the 7th tier escort has observed during transit." "He's a cat," I said. "He is an Earth origin fauna that, during a standard interior corridor transit, performed an unprompted long-duration environmental scan, a ventilation access assessment, 2 independent threat priority evaluations of moving contacts, a sustained apex gaze exchange with an escort commander of the 7th tier resulting in the escort commander initiating a prey behavior inquiry, and then disengaged from the escort commander at his own discretion." I thought about this. "He was looking at things," I said. "He looks at things, that's just what he does." "The 7th tier," Casavrin said, "does not have a category for companion animal that performs unprompted tactical assessments of the environment and then disengages from the escort commander at its own discretion." "Can you just put companion animal?" I said. "I cannot," Casavrin said, "in good conscience put companion animal on a document that will be reviewed by the Conclave's transit authority, and that will reflect on this office's competence. If the Conclave's transit authority reviews this transit and finds that the category was companion animal, they will assume the escort was unnecessary." "The escort was," I said carefully, "technically unnecessary." "The escort," Drevath said from behind me, "would not have changed the outcome of any interaction this animal chose to initiate." I turned to look at him. He was watching Biscuit. His face had the settled quality of a professional who has updated his model of a thing and has not yet decided what to do with the update. "Escort Commander Drevath," I said, "he's a cat," he yawned at you. "He displayed full dentition," Drevath said, "in the context of a sustained gaze exchange. He then disengaged at his discretion, which indicates he completed his assessment and made a classification decision about me." "His classification decision," I said, "was probably big, not hostile, not interesting right now." "Yes," Drevath said, "that is the classification. Not interesting right now." He paused. "On Veth-Kaari, the only things classified as not interesting right now by a predator are things the predator has already determined it could address if it chose to. The right now is the operative phrase." There was a quiet in the receiving bay that I had not been expecting. Biscuit sneezed. It was a small, complete sneeze that involved a brief full-body shudder and left him looking momentarily aggrieved. He recovered, settled, and went back to looking at a middle distance. The receiving coordinator, who had not spoken since we arrived, turned to his forms and began writing something with a deliberation that suggested he wanted, very much, to appear busy. I looked at Casavrin. "What category," I said, "are you going to put him in?" "I am going to consult with the transit authority," she said. "For the return journey, it may take an hour." "I need to feed him in approximately 40 minutes, I said. "Then we will make it 50 minutes, she said. I sat down on one of the bench seats along the receiving bay wall. Biscuit arranged himself across my lap with his full 14 kilograms and began to clean his face. He worked through both ears, both sides of his jaw, and the back of one front paw. In the systematic sequence I had watched him perform roughly twice a day for 6 years. The cleaning lasted about 4 minutes. Then he lowered his head to my knee, closed his eyes, and went to sleep. I sat in the receiving bay of the Veth-Kaari Conclave diplomatic dock and watched the honor guards of the 7th tier fill out paperwork about my cat. 3 of them were involved in the classification discussion. Kesevran was on a communications link with the transit authority, speaking in rapid Veth-Kaari at a register my translator was struggling with, something to do with category amendments and cross-referencing, and a phrase that kept recurring that my translator kept rendering as self-directing apex fauna, with an asterisk indicating uncertain translation confidence. Drevath was reviewing his own incident log and writing with the methodical focus of a man who knows that whatever he writes today is going to be read by people with strong opinions about thoroughness. His second came over to me at some point, carrying a flat document pad, and asked me a series of questions about Biscuit's feeding schedule, exercise habits, preferred resting positions, and with considerable care his behavior during what she described as contact scenarios. I answered honestly. Yes, he ate twice a day. Yes, he went outside when facility access was suitable. No, he had not bitten anyone. He had scratched a piece of furniture that he had, in his considered view, been given insufficient access to. She wrote all of this down. "Can I ask," I said, "what you're writing?" "A behavioral assessment," she said, "for the transit authority file." "I thought you were updating the category." "We are also doing a behavioral assessment," she said. "For the category update, we need the behavioral assessment." "He sleeps about 14 hours a day," I said. "He doesn't like closed doors. He prefers water that is moving. He has one enemy who is the laser pointer, and that relationship is complicated." She looked up at me. "The laser pointer," she said. "A small handheld device that produces a light point. He chases it. He has never caught it. This is a source of significant personal frustration." She wrote something down. I could not see what. The hour passed. Biscuit slept through most of it. He woke once when the communications in the bay got louder during what appeared to be a disagreement between Kesevran and someone at the transit authority, lifted his head, assessed the source, determined it was not relevant, and went back to sleep. About 40 minutes in, a 4th Veth-Kaari entered the receiving bay. He was not in armor, and he was not in administrative formal attire. He was in what appeared to be working dress, close-fitted, functional, with markings on the collar that I didn't have a reference for. He had the bearing of someone who walks into rooms expecting to be the most senior person in them, and has not, historically, been wrong about this. He stopped inside the doorway and looked at the chamber, at the honor guards with their documentation, at Kesevran on her communication link, at the receiving coordinator bent over his forms. Then he looked at me. Then he looked at Biscuit. Biscuit was asleep. He was fully asleep, in the deep relaxation position he used when he had decided a space was secure, which involved his chin on my knee and both front paws tucked under his chest, and the whole of his long fur distributed around him in a way that made him look in that position like a particularly ambitious floor covering. He was purring. He sometimes purred in his sleep when he was comfortable. It was a low, consistent vibration that I felt more than heard, a rumble in the frequency range that suggested that whatever he was dreaming about had been found satisfactory. The Veth-Kaari in the doorway stood very still. "Commander Kesevran," he said, in a register that did not carry across the room loudly but that, I thought, carried very well anyway. Kesevran looked up from her communication link and saw who had come in. She said something into the link that was clearly a suspension, not a termination, and stood. "Administrator Vethrak," she said, We did not expect you until the end of the hour. The Transit Authority referred the category amendment to my office directly, said Administrator Veth-Kaari. His gaze had not moved from Biscuit. I came to review the animal in person before approving the classification. I looked at Kesavrin. Kesavrin looked at me with an expression that communicated, without words, that this was an unexpected complication and that she was handling it. Administrator, she said, this is Coordinator Casson, the diplomatic courier from Kesavar Station. The animal is her registered companion fauna. Coordinator Casson, the administrator said, without looking at me. Administrator, I said. This animal is from Earth. Yes. It entered Veth-Kaari Prime Territory via diplomatic transit. Yes, it's listed on my personal manifest as non-hazardous biological. The Transit Authority has referred a classification amendment request, Veth-Kaari said, on the basis that the 7th Tier Escort Commander observed apex fauna behavior during transit and has submitted a 17-page incident report. He hasn't finished it yet, I said. He's still working on it. There was a small silence. He's still working on it, Veth-Kaari repeated. He's thorough, I said. Veth-Kaari looked at Drevath. Drevath, who had been sitting with his documentation at the far bench, met the look. Something passed between them that I did not have the cultural fluency to read, but that had the quality of two very senior professionals registering a mutual professional assessment. Veth-Kaari walked across the receiving bay to where I was sitting. He was taller than Kesavrin and closer in height to the honor guards, perhaps 2 meters and 30, with the particular quality of physical presence that comes not from size alone, but from the assumption behind the size, the way a person moves when they have spent their career in rooms that went quiet when they arrived. He stopped 2 meters away and looked at Biscuit. Biscuit slept. He slept with the profound commitment of a cat that has done its assessments and found the environment acceptable and has no further professional obligations for the time being. His ears twitched once at some sound below my range. His purring continued. Administrator Veth-Kaari looked at the purring for a long moment. What is that sound? He said. Purring, I said. Cats do it when they're comfortable. It's a vibration produced by rapid glottal movement. He does it when he's relaxed and when he's happy and sometimes when he's eating. I paused. Also sometimes at the vet, which is a different thing, but he finds it useful there too. It is a vocalization. Yes. While resting. Yes. Veth-Kaari was quiet for a moment. On Veth-Kaari, he said, the only organisms that vocalize while resting are those that have no biological need to remain undetected, because they have no biological need to remain undetected. I looked at Biscuit. He was purring steadily. That, I said, is probably accurate. This animal, Veth-Kaari said, is purring in the receiving bay of the Veth-Kaari Conclave. He's comfortable, I said. He decided the space was fine. He goes to sleep when he's made his assessment and the assessment was satisfactory. Veth-Kaari looked at the sleeping cat for a long time. Then he turned to Kesavrin. Approve the classification amendment, he said. Category, apex companion, self-directing, human bonded, expedite it. He paused. And add a note to the receiving bay environmental log that the space was assessed by a visiting Earth origin apex fauna and cleared. Kesavrin wrote this down without visible expression, which was the expression of someone who is saving their visible expression for later. Will you need to conduct the Transit Authority review in person? She said. No, said Veth-Kaari. He looked at Biscuit once more. Drevath's incident report will be sufficient. He straightened. When it is finished. He walked out of the receiving bay without further comment. Drevath, from his bench, returned to his documentation. At the end of the hour, Kesavrin came back to me with a document on a flat pad. Coordinator Casson, she said. We have established an interim category for the return transit of your companion animal. The category is Earth Origin Self-Directing Companion Fauna, Apex Classification, Non-Hostile Current Status, Human Bonded. This is a provisional category that will be reviewed by the Conclave Transit Authority for permanent codification. I looked at the document. The manifest entry said non-hazardous biological sample. The manifest entry, Kesavrin said, was not wrong, it was incomplete. She paused. We do not fault you for it. The category did not previously exist. What does the apex classification mean, practically, for the return journey? The escort will be the same formation, she said. The 7th tier. Commander Drevath has, on his own initiative, requested to continue as escort commander for the return transit. I looked at Drevath, who was reviewing his documentation with the expression of a man who is not currently looking at me. He requested it, I said. He submitted the request through standard channels, Kesavrin confirmed. I thought about this for a moment. Does the 7th tier, I said, escort apex fauna routinely? No, Kesavrin said. Commander Drevath indicated in his request that it was a matter of professional interest. She paused again. He noted that during the transit, the animal evaluated him and classified him as not currently a priority. Another pause. He would like to see if the classification holds on the return. I looked at Biscuit, who was still asleep on my lap. He was fully relaxed, both hind legs extended, his tail lying loose across my knee, one ear occasionally twitching at sounds I couldn't hear. It'll hold, I said. Commander Drevath, Kesavrin said, is prepared to accept that. I fed Biscuit in the receiving bay, which I had brought provisions for because I planned ahead. He ate the entire bowl with the focused efficiency of an animal that has priorities in order, and then looked at me with the expectation of the second course, which I also had because I know my cat. He ate that too. Then he sat on the floor in the middle of the receiving bay, washed his face again, and then walked deliberately to a patch of light that was falling through a high window onto the stone floor, lay down in it, and stretched to his full length. In the full stretch, a Maine Coon reads much larger than in the compact rest position. He was perhaps a meter from nose to extended hind paws. His fur, which is long and dense, and layered in the way that evolution produces in animals that have spent generations in northern winters, caught the light in a way that made him look considerably more substantial than 14 kilograms. 3 of the honor guards were watching him. Not staring, not alarm, the specific quality of attention that military professionals give to things they have decided are worth tracking. Biscuit yawned again. A full yawn, ceiling-directed, eyes closed, every tooth available. The guard on the left made that small sound again. He does that a lot, I said. He's not threatening anything, he's just flexible. Yes, the guard said. The word had a quality of a man who has updated a belief and is still working out what the new belief means for his overall model of the world. The return transit was 6 hours in the high-speed corridor, same as the outbound. Biscuit was in his carrier with the latches I had reinforced with a secondary clip that I was reasonably confident he couldn't work from the inside. He was mostly quiet. He slept for about 4 of the 6 hours and spent the other 2 sitting at the carrier mesh and watching the transit craft's interior with methodical attention. The craft's human crew, 2 transit pilots who had been briefed on the manifest, left him alone, which was correct, and I told them so. One of them asked, during the mid-transit rest period, whether they could take his picture. I said yes, and they did, and the picture showed Biscuit looking directly at the camera with his amber eyes fully open and his ears in the neutral forward position. It was, they both agreed, a good picture. Drevath's formation rode in the forward compartment for the full 6 hours. He had requested it, I gathered, because it was the correct protocol for returning the diplomatic courier safely to Kesavar Station Transit Dock, now that the courier had been reclassified as traveling with Apex-class companion fauna. The request had been filed through proper channels. It had been approved without comment. Halfway through the return transit, Drevath's second came back to the cargo compartment, where I was sitting with the carrier in the seat beside me, and asked if the animal required anything. "He's fine," I said. "He'd like to be out of the carrier, but I've secured it. He'll be all right." She looked at the carrier. Biscuit looked back at her from behind the mesh. "He is watching me," she said. "He watches everything," I said. "It's not personal, you're just new." "How long does he watch something new before he decides?" "Depends on the thing," I said. "You're probably already filed." She stood there for a moment, looking at Biscuit looking at her. Then she went back to the forward compartment. The Veth-Kaari, I reflected, had a very different relationship with being observed than I did. On Earth, you watch something because you haven't decided about it yet. For the Veth-Kaari, apparently, being watched by an apex predator and found still worth watching was its own category of uncomfortable. When we docked at Kesavar Station and I carried Biscuit off the boarding ramp, the Transit Authority desk officer was waiting for me with a revised category form that needed my signature. I signed it. She handed me a copy. Earth Origin Self-Directing Companion Fauna, Apex Classification, Non-Hostile Current Status, Human Bonded. I folded the copy and put it in my jacket pocket. On the walk back to my quarters, Biscuit managed to work the carrier clip open. I felt the shift of weight and caught the flap before he could get through, and he sat back with the expression of a cat who is deciding whether to be persistent about this. "No," I said, "we're almost home." He considered this. He sat back further and looked at a point beyond my shoulder with the careful attention he gave to things he was deciding weren't worth his time right now. "Good," I said. I carried him the rest of the way. His food bowl was empty and had been for 3 days. I refilled it. He ate. Then he went to the second highest piece of furniture in my quarters, which is a bookshelf that I had long since stopped trying to keep cat-free, stepped onto it with the deliberate confidence of an animal reclaiming a known position, turned around twice, and lay down. He curled his tail over his nose. He closed his eyes. I put the category form on my desk. I made a note in my logistics log, updated manifest classification, return transit complete, no incidents. I crossed out no incidents and wrote instead, no incidents that required my involvement. That seemed more accurate. I turned out the light over the desk. The window of my quarters looked out onto the transit dock, which at this hour was mostly quiet, a few supply craft running lights visible in the mid-distance. I could see, if I looked, the corridor that connected Kesavar to the high-speed transit to Veth-Kaari Prime. It was just a corridor. 18 hours ago, it had been a completely ordinary assignment. On the bookshelf, Biscuit breathed slowly. His tail moved once, just the tip, in whatever cat dream he had found on the other side of sleep. Then it went still. I went to bed. 2 weeks later, I received a formal notification from the Veth-Kaari Conclave's Transit Authority that the interim category had been made permanent and cross-filed with the Galactic Compact's Interspecies Biological Transport Registry. The permanent category was listed as Earth Felis Catus, Large Form Variant, Maine Coon, Apex Companion Designation. Notes: Human Bonded, High Situational Awareness, Self-Directing, Apex Spear Recognition observed in Field Assessment. Classification confirmed by 7th Tier Escort after full corridor transit. Recommended Transit Protocol. Standard Companion Animal Documentation. No additional restriction. Escort at human handler's discretion. There was a supplemental document attached. I opened it. It was Commander Drevath's incident report. 17 pages. He had written it in Veth-Kaari and someone at the Conclave had formally translated it. The incident report covered, in exact procedural detail, every behavioral observation made during the transit, the carrier egress, the wall scan, the ventilation assessment, the contact evaluations, the gaze exchange, the sustained apex-peer interaction and resolution. Each incident was cross-referenced to Veth-Kaari behavioral classification taxonomy, with annotation explaining where the taxonomy had been insufficient and where new subcategories had been recommended. The final paragraph read, "In 17 years of 7th-tier escort service, this officer has not previously observed an apex-class fauna complete a full environmental scan of an interior corridor, perform an unprompted threat evaluation of a moving contact, and disengage from an apex-peer gaze exchange at its own discretion in the same transit. The animal's temperament was classified by this officer as stable, non-hostile, and fully self-regulating. The accompanying human handler demonstrated complete calm throughout the transit, which this officer notes is consistent with the behavioral literature on Earth-origin Deathworld fauna. The most dangerous things on the planet are routinely handled by people who see no reason to raise their voice." This officer recommends that the Conclave update its pre-transit briefing materials for diplomatic staff to include an overview of Earth-origin companion fauna, and suggests that the manifest classification, non-hazardous, be reviewed for accuracy when applied to any fauna of Earth origin. I read that last line twice. Then I put the document down on my desk, next to Biscuit, who had moved from the bookshelf to the desk sometime in the last hour, and was sitting on top of a stack of freight invoices, watching me with his amber eyes at the comfortable half-attention that meant he wasn't concerned, but he was available if something became interesting. "He says non-hazardous might not be accurate," I told him. Biscuit blinked once, the slow blink, full and deliberate, that cats perform when they are communicating something that does not require further elaboration. I updated the manifest template. Companion animal Earth origin, classification, Maine Coon, temperament, calm. Recommend current documentation format, escort at handler's discretion. That seemed right. I filed the form. Biscuit got off the invoices and relocated to the chair by the window where the light was better. He sat facing the transit dock, watching the supply craft with the methodical attention he brought to anything that moved at a regular interval. Just a cat watching the ships. 14 kilograms of non-hazardous biological sample, Earth origin companion classification, doing what he had always done, in whatever room he happened to be in, looking at things, deciding what mattered, getting it right.